Hey Tim.
Hey Laurie, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. I have some extremely loud roadworks going on outside my room right now, so we'll probably get to share that with our listeners over the course of this episode, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I don't have any roadworks. I actually have no sound whatsoever. I live in the most remote part of the fens.
In the bleak fens.
So this is prime podcasting country, I think.
Perfect. Well chosen there, Tim.
It's all part of the master plan, Laurie. It all leads up to this episode, the whole house move.
Hello, and welcome to Adventures in Learning Design, a series of conversations about ideas, principles, research and practice, exploring how we can make learning more effective and more enjoyable, whether that's in the workplace, at school, at university or at home. My name's Laurie Harrison.
And my name is Tim Gifford.
And we're both co-founders of LearnJam, a digital learning agency and consultancy. Episode 6, The Learning Design Process. So in this episode, for which you have moved house, we are going to be talking about our learning design process.
That's right.
So way back in episode 4, we talked about design thinking for learning. And we thought it'd be interesting in this episode to look at how we use that process in the real projects that we do every day and every week. So what are the stages that we actually work through when we're working with people to develop learning experiences?
I think it'd be interesting to see how we incorporate that or how we combine that with learning science to create a learning design process, how that feeds into our learning design process.
We're going to talk through the main stages that we go through in a project, and hopefully as we do that, we will explore a little bit, where does design thinking fit into this? Where does learning science fit into this? And are there any interesting little nuggets of insight or information that we can pull out of these stages that might be useful?
Absolutely. And it's worth saying at this point as well that this learning design process is continually being iterated upon, isn't it? Like as we encounter different types of projects, different types of challenges within those projects, we kind of adapt and modify how we approach that in our process and what the activities are that we use and what the deliverables are that we create in the process. So I guess this is very much like at time of writing / at time of podcasting. This is how we would define our learning design process.
Yeah. But I think that there's always a number of main stages that we would always go through on any project where we're helping someone to design a learning experience or a course. Should we just jump in? Those main stages are... We always start with stage 1, which is discovery, and that's where we are looking to find out more about what's going on at the moment. So the current situation, is there a course already, for example, that needs to be reworked? Is there nothing, but there's a need to create a learning experience or a course? What do we know about the learners? What do we know about the organisation that wants to create this thing? Who are the people with an interest in that? What are the goals? All that kind of stuff. So we'll come back to that. But that's the first stage, is discovery. What's going on? What's the context here? What needs to be achieved for the learner? And what do they need to do? We then move on to stage 2, which, Tim, is...
I believe it's concept development, Laurie. So taking the outputs that we have gathered in that initial discovery phase, we then start applying our design thinking processes to develop a deeper understanding of an organization's goals, what those learner needs are, and then we start moving towards coming up with a range of creative solutions that we can then rapidly develop and test through a prototype. And this is where we start bringing in more actively the learning design, learning science, I should say, aspect of this process in that concept development phase.
There's all sorts of ways that you can actually work through this concept development stage. So we'll talk through that. But one of the really interesting and fun ways of doing that is through a design sprint, which I think deserves a whole episode in itself. So we'll cover that in future. But I think we'll talk about it a bit in this episode as well. So we've done the discovery stage. We've been through the concept development stage where we've come up with a solution and we've prototyped that and tested it. And then stage 3 is what we call content and platform blueprinting. And this is basically where we take that concept and we get it ready to put into production. So that's putting together the syllabus, the course structure, content briefs, guidelines, and all that kind of stuff. Getting our ducks in a row so that we're ready to go. Once that's done, stage 4.
Production. So this is where we start creating the content, developing or configuring the platform that it's going to be delivered on. And we kind of start going into creating the content, editing the content, getting it ready for release, and carrying out the necessary QA before it's launched. So this is sort of like the rubber to the road part, really, isn't it?
This is where it all happens. What often happens in our experience is that there's a kind of rush to get straight to the stage as quick as possible. And if that is the case, the result of that often is that everything goes wrong. So because this production stage is where most of the time and the money actually is spent on a project. This is where you're writing content and creating video and audio and maybe building a platform and putting all of that stuff together. So this is the big stage. And if you haven't done the previous 3 stages properly, there's a really good chance that basically you're going to spend a lot of time and money building the wrong thing. So either something that doesn't work for learners because it's not really what they need, or it doesn't help them learn what they need to learn, or it doesn't actually meet the goals of the organization that's creating this thing.
Totally.
So it might be something that works for learners. It might be a commercial product, for example, that no one wants to buy.
Yeah.
And those earlier stages are where we could have found that out much more quickly and cheaply, for example, with a prototype.
Yeah. You don't want to be changing direction or changing scope in that production stage. That's where it gets costly, risky, and problematic for a number of reasons. So yeah, you really want to head off any uncertainties or questions really early on. I'll tell you how I think about this, Laurie. If I can just pull a pin and throw in an analogy here.
Yeah. Okay.
I think I see this as being much like building a house, right? So that discovery stage is really like before even like breaking ground, before even drawing anything, any plans or architect sketches. It's like, what is the environment in which this building is going to be built? What's happening in that space already? What are the needs of the people who are going to be living there and using this building? Like what's happening where we are proposing to build? Let's get a really good understanding of that. You could even go as far as to super stretch this analogy around like, those searches around, are there any sort of environmental, chemical considerations that we need to consider? Like all that sort of stuff. But like what is happening here currently? And that concept development then is kind of like just sketching up without any sort of engineering or architectural detail. Like this is the sort of building that we think fits and would work for that space, for those people, etc. And then going into that content and platform blueprinting, it's the blueprints. This is how this thing fits together. These are all of the buttresses, lintels, load-bearing beams.
Buttresses,
that you need.
Wow. Tim, we're building a cathedral of learning here,
Exactly.
literally.
But you get the idea, right? This is how this thing stands up and how it works and how it's going to do what it does. And that production is, let's break the ground, pour the foundations, and then whatever else happens when you build a house. That's the model I have in my mind. It's before you invest in that.
I like that one. I think that works for me. Mapping that to our stages. So the discovery stage, that's kind of what is the context, what's the situation. The initial site surveys, planning permission, all that kind of stuff. Exactly. What's feasible, and what kind of thing do you want? Do you want a 4-bedroom eco house with ground source heat pump, or do you want an executive McMansion? So it's kind of getting those big picture goals in place and surveying the landscape. And
what's needed, right? So like we don't just want to rock up into a tiny village like mine and just whack up a 7-story duplex if what's needed is just like, families living and going to school, traveling to work, that sort of stuff. Like what is the actual requirement here? What is actually possible, feasible, etc. in that space? What do people want? What's possible? What's the context? What's the situation? And then the concept development is where your chosen architect is flourishing a pencil and kind of sketching stuff out and saying, so here's my vision. You're going to have the swimming pool just out the back there with the balcony there, and turrets on the roof right there, and then the open plan bathroom, kitchen. Have you been speaking to my architect, by the way? That sounds like cannily close to what my requirements were.
And I noticed that on TV, these people, they draw with a pencil and they always hold the pencil right near the far end of the pencil. Do you know what I mean?
I haven't noticed this.
Okay, watch out for that. So they can do very bold sketches.
Right.
With a flourish. So that's concept development. Is this the kind of thing you want? Here's my vision. Does this... No? Okay, let me throw that away. Well, how about this? Here's a vision. Does this match what you want? Okay, well, how about if let's just rub that out from the sketch. What if we put the kitchen there?
Yeah.
And then the door here? So it's kind of, we're sketching out ideas, we're running them past people, we're seeing if that's going to work, is that going to meet your needs? Mm-hmm. But it's still, we're playing with concepts here. It's quick and easy and cheap to change our minds at this stage. And then we might, again, the house building thing, you might actually, if it's a big project, you might build a scale model, a small scale model out of cardboard or something, so that you can actually visualize it in 3D space. We're pushing this analogy quite hard, but I think it does work. And the other thing that you sometimes see is, say someone's remodeling their kitchen. I've seen this on property programs on TV where people will bring in like big cardboard boxes and stuff, say, right, this is your cooker. Let's put that here. Let's see how that fits. These 4 boxes represent your dining table. And then you can actually walk around the space and see what's working and what's not.
And that's a really important part of this, and taking this back to like the learning design process, it's through those really early sketches and concepts that you maybe unearth other requirements or problems. It's like, oh no, I can't have my table there because we need a through route to the conservatory, for example. It's like, it's only through seeing that sketched out that we're starting to see how things need to work. But it's all done in a way that, first of all, like does start to address problems and challenges and opportunities, but also starts to, in a very light way, test how that solution might work without like really investing anything and breaking any ground and like committing to anything. So yeah, it's a really important part of that process.
Then we're into stage 3, which is the blueprinting. It's going to start getting a bit more tricky, expensive to change our minds once we're past this stage, really. So this is where we're creating detailed plans. So again, it's pretty obvious in the house building analogy, that's where you get the detailed architectural drawings created, the detailed surveys and so on. The end goal is something that you can hand over to a team of builders and they can build your house.
Exactly. And that's where your grip shifts from the end of the pencil really close to the nib.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's when you're really making those, you're committing to what you're drawing there.
Totally, yeah.
No, but you're right, and that's a good point. So that blueprint is, whether we build it or anyone else builds it, all of that information is encoded into that blueprint. That's what you need to create this course.
And then production is where you build the house, or in our case, you write the content, you build the platform, you create the videos, and you put it all together. One thought that occurs to me, Tim, is the house building analogy I think works really well for what we've just described, for a process where you're designing something in quite a lot of detail up front and then moving to the build or production stage.
You better pick holes in my analogy, Laurie.
Well, I'm gonna pose a challenge, maybe.
It's watertight.
And my challenge is this. We have long been proponents of the Agile approach to product development, whereby the principle is that you don't design every little detail up front and then move into a whole separate production phase, that you follow a more emergent approach. So you have a direction that you set, and then you identify what are the highest priority things that need to get done, and then you develop those in short sprints, put those in front of users and get feedback and adjust course as you go. And it might be that by the time you've finished, what you've created is quite different from what you maybe originally had in mind. And that's a good thing, because what you've created has been created in response to real feedback from real users. So therefore it's more optimized for them and more likely to succeed. So given that, and given that we've just described the stages that we work through and use the house building analogy, where we do the discovery phase, we sort of get the lie of the land, we sketch a concept, prototype that, get the users to agree that, yep, I'm looking at that prototype and that's exactly what I want. Then we blueprint it, we create detailed plans, and then we move into production. The challenge is, how does that fit with the benefits of the Agile approach? Can those two things be married together?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that blueprint is a vision, isn't it? It's the strongest working hypothesis you have, given the information and research and design principles you've applied. But it's in the execution that you maybe start seeing ways to optimize it and improve it or where some of your assumptions or hypotheses need to be revisited. I hope this is going to be the last time we reference the house analogy.
Okay.
But,
are we ready to move on?
Yeah, but imagine the builders, when they're actually executing on that blueprint and putting the house up, they stop after every couple of rooms, invite the family back in and say, okay, we've just done the first floor. Could you kind of just spend a couple of hours running through your morning routine, breakfasts, brushing teeth, all the rest of it? Like, does this layout actually work for you? Is there anything that we need to optimize here? Okay, cool. We'll find out what we need to improve. We'll add it to the list of things and we'll readjust and go from there. That example is to say that's how we work with our learning design process, right? It's like build, test, learn from that, and then take that learning back into the production process.
I think it's a good segue out of the house building analogy, because I think that's where maybe there is a difference here in that I'm not sure, I'm not an expert in house building, by the way, but I'm not sure that that's how you'd necessarily want to build a house, that you do it room by room, for example. That could get quite messy. But the reality is that in creating a course or a learning experience, in our experience, it does work to do it in this more incremental, emergent way, where we've understood who the learners are, what their needs are, what the goals of the organisation creating the course are, what success looks like. We've sketched out concepts, played around with that. We've created and tested a prototype so that we know that our ideas are resonating. And then we've done a blueprinting phase where we've mapped out the structure in more detail and maybe like the first part of it in enough detail to move into production. But maybe the key thing there is to avoid the temptation to plan and map out every single tiny detail in advance before going into production, because once you start writing content and creating stuff and putting that in front of people, you are going to realize that some of your assumptions were wrong.
Totally. And be prepared for that. Like, that's part of the process. Like, expect something to come back challenging or not validating some of your early assumptions. Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's a caveat, or just something to maybe to be aware of when thinking through these stages that we've described, is that as we move into blueprint, the third and fourth stage, blueprint and production, that there is, in a good learning design process, there is inherent flexibility and, like I said, a kind of emergent approach that we expect that things will change and that we'll learn as we do this, as we go through these later stages and adjust. And things will evolve. But everything is grounded in those early stages where everything that we do is based on understanding who the learners are, what they're trying to achieve, what success looks like for the organisation, and that we've put the time in to develop a range of concepts and test and prototype those before investing the most of the time and the money in the blueprinting and production stages.
That's it. Shall we close the door on the cathedral of learning for now and step away from that?
And then, let's close that door. And
Click.
in the edit, I'm going to add a door closing sound effect.
Yes, do. Oh, do. Yeah, love it.
And listeners, you are about to hear the door close. Okay, with that done, Tim, let's move on. Shall we look at each of those four stages in a little bit more detail and maybe sort of share some thoughts on how we actually do these?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So you said at the top there that everything starts with discovery. This is us getting a sense of like the lay of the land, like what's happening currently. What are the needs, what are the problems that learners are experiencing? But it's not just learners that are involved in this process, right? It's kind of a bit more of a comprehensive stage. What would you typically go through in a discovery, and who would you expect to speak to?
Yeah, a whole load of people. Like you said, I mean, the learners are the most important, but typically it's not, in our case, it's not learners who are coming to us saying we need a course or a learning experience. It's some kind of organisation. So it might be a commercial organisation that wants to create a product. It might be a university that needs to create an online course, for example. So the obvious starting point for us is we need to talk to the people involved in that organisation. So anyone with an interest in the outcome of this project. It might be the person commissioning a course. It might be their boss. It might be the teachers or trainers who are going to be using this thing with learners. It will be learners themselves, wherever possible. there might be other stakeholders as well that aren't immediately obvious. There might be, for example, support teams. There might just be people in an organisation with a strong interest in the project who have some influence on it. It might be, I don't know, a designer who works within an organisation who is influential within the team and has strong opinions that need to be taken into account. Anyone, any stakeholder. So it could be learners, it could be teachers, it could be people on the business side of an organisation or on the implementation side, typically.
And why is it important to get those people together and to get their perspectives on this project before we commence developing any concepts?
First of all, they will all have different perspectives, and everyone has assumptions about what's needed and what's going to work. And you do need to bring in a broad range of voices and perspectives to sort of uncover those. And we always find that there are differences or different assumptions that come out in this discovery phase. It's like, I thought we were doing this to make money. And I thought we were doing this to build our brand primarily. It's that kind of stuff. Yeah. Or, well, I was only interested in actually helping our learners. I don't care about the commercial side. You get all these different voices and different perspectives. Sometimes you'll find that everyone was already very aligned, but there's always some differences in assumptions or underlying thoughts about why this project exists, even at the early stage before anything really has happened. So that's one reason, is to identify different thoughts, different opinions, different perspectives, and make sure that they're all accounted for.
But on that point, I've worked on projects where that's been a really useful stage, as in critical stage. Even sort of like we kind of did a discovery stage once a significant amount of work had been done. And what it exposed was that although when the team got together, we were all talking confidently and clearly about the product, like the learning solution itself, it turned out that we all had very different mental models around what that product needed to do. So although like in real time, it all seems like there's agreement and buy-in and sort of like people are kind of talking about the same thing, what you maybe overlook is, I may be thinking about it completely differently to what you are. And that's going to cause real problems when we start getting to the nitty-gritty of it. So it's worth getting those things captured.
In my experience, more often than not, that is the case.
Yeah.
But more often than not, people tend to assume that everyone shares the same or a similar mental model.
Yeah.
So that's the disconnect. It's like we all assume that we're thinking of the same thing, but probably we're not. That's what my experience has been anyway. So that's the first reason. The second reason is just getting buy-in from everyone, so that everyone feels that they've had their say, they've had an influence, that they've been listened to, and that they have a sense of ownership of what's going on, which means that they're going to be more committed to the project, more supportive, and more willing to speak up and share their thoughts and opinions as we go. And it's really risky to skip this discovery stage of talking to and getting input from all of the interested parties or stakeholders in a project. If you haven't kind of teased out all those different mental models, as you mentioned, and you haven't got everyone sort of feeling that they're involved in this and they have a say in this, you are potentially in for a very tricky project further down the line at a stage where it is much more difficult and expensive to change things.
Mate, been there. We developed a product that was about 2 weeks away from launching, and then a stakeholder that we had hitherto not really had any communication with or had been involved reviews what we'd done and made some dramatic change requests.
Yes.
Which was a learning moment for us, which was, okay, we really need to be making sure that all of the people that matter, all of the people who need to sign off and agree on this thing and feel bought in and enthused about this, have their say and share their model of this and expectations really early on. Otherwise, it's going to be costly, frustrating, and demotivating to change tack when you've everybody's been so bought into it and excited about it.
Obviously, learners are the most important stakeholder in this process, and we definitely advocate a learner-centered approach. That's at the heart of everything that we do. But if you fail to take into account other important stakeholders within an organisation, your whole project can come unstuck. There are people in any organisation who are influential and who need to be heard, basically. And whatever learners may think of the solution that you've come up with, if they're not on board, it's going to crash and burn. So that's the kind of a key part of this discovery stage, is getting all of that input. Yeah, and we do that through workshops and surveys and all sorts of ways. We don't, we can get, maybe that's something we can get into in another episode, the specifics of how we do that. But the main thing is that does happen. What else happens in discovery, Tim?
Well, we also take a look at what content currently exists. Yeah. So if you're looking to move in-person training online, for example, or if you're looking to iterate and improve on an existing online learning product, we'll take a look at what have you currently got? What format is your content in? Where is it located? How is it structured? Is there a curriculum already behind this or that's structuring this content? But let's take a look at, what have you currently got? How is it being used? What format is it in? And the same for the platform as well, if you're already using one. What are you using? How are you using it? What are its constraints, limitations, that sort of stuff? So really getting a sense of, okay, this is where we are now. This is where everything is and how everything is currently used and how it's structured and so on, just to get a really good understanding of that, that lie of the land, like I say. So it's all really useful stuff. And this all kind of builds towards a first set of deliverables, which is, a summary of some key insights and findings from that process. This is what we understood from you in your organization, your stakeholders, around what their goals and success criteria are. This is what we heard from your learners. Let's pull out some really insightful quotes and things like that from that process to help guide us as we go forward. And we also start kind of capturing early stage problem and learning design solution ideas. So, this is a problem that we've heard from your stakeholders and learners. This is how we might start addressing that, just starting to get some early thoughts together, as well as starting to kind of coalesce around some learning design principles and how we might see those being applied as we move forward into the more of the solution sort of stage of the process.
Yeah, so it might be something like, I don't know, through this process and through talking to people, we've discovered that there's an existing online course, but learners aren't really engaging very much with it. They don't enjoy it and they're not spending enough time in it, and they're therefore coming out of that online course without having developed the skills and knowledge that they need.
A key artifact from this discovery process is a set of personas for learners and other key stakeholders in the process. Persona there is a kind of genericized profile of key people involved in this process. A persona is a sketch of a person's needs, contexts, motivations, pain points, challenges, and it's designed in a way to not be about a specific person, but it's kind of an amalgamation of people that fit that profile. And it's intended to help us as designers and the broader project team to have characters, people, in inverted commas, I'm doing air quotes as I'm saying that we can kind of speak to and have conversations with, as it were, as we go through the process. Does this solution or does this idea help the persona of the trainer, for example? And those personas are generated in that discovery process. And it sounds like we're covering a lot. I mean, we do cover a lot in that discovery, but it doesn't take a lot of time. And I don't think it's supposed to. It's supposed to be quite a quick turnaround. We're talking 2 or 3 days of getting into the nitty-gritty of this. And you don't want that to run on, because you've got to get into design mindset quite quickly. So this discovery is let's gather as much as we can, as quickly as we can, synthesize that, get insights, get personas, share, and then get onto the next stage of concept development. Yep.
Yeah, our goal, for me anyway, goal of the discovery is, get this done quick. But we just need to stop and take a moment to talk to some learners, talk to some stakeholders, have a look at what already exists and pull together. Here's what we know. Here's who we're designing this for. Here's the people who have a say in this and what their beliefs are about this thing. And maybe here's our early thoughts on what the main problems are and what solutions to those might look like, but without sort of committing to anything at this stage.
Exactly. And we have had projects where they haven't progressed past that discovery stage, because through that sort of stakeholder involvement and interviews and getting their sort of perspectives captured and shared, that stakeholder group has discovered that actually we did have completely different mental models, and we maybe aren't thinking about this in the same terms. It's not a learning solution. We don't need to do anything, or we need to do something else. We don't need to progress with this. So it is kind of a bit of an opportunity to sense check, confirm that we are thinking about this in the same way. We are thinking about our learners in the same way. We are ready to go into concept development. But maybe, that's where you leave it, and that's where you pivot and start looking at other solutions that aren't learning-oriented ones.
Yeah, that's right. You may find that for the sake of a one-day workshop, you've suddenly realised you don't need to do £1 million project.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean...
If you can dodge that bullet.
Hashtag savings,
Yeah, that's right.
Helps.
So that's discovery. The next big stage, I think this is a bigger one in a way, because like I said, discovery is a fairly quick one, but the next one is concept development. So this is where we're taking what we learnt there and then we're digging a lot deeper into goals, user needs and so on, and then we're generating ideas, coming up with possible solutions, homing in on the solution that we feel is the best fit, and then prototyping that and testing that. And we go through that cycle until we've got something that everyone involved thinks, yeah, this is great, this is working, and this is what we want to take forward.
And this is where the design thinking kind of process that we talked about in episode 4 comes into play, doesn't it? So it's like, let's start putting some solution sketches together, start sketching stuff out and capturing some early ideas, responding to those, sharing those, and kind of iterating on them. But yeah, this is where we kind of move into that design thinking mode very much. In doing so, we're starting to fill out and deepen our understanding of the problem, sort of solution space. Again, filling that out with ideas around what learning design principles would be required to address those problems. And when we get into the idea stage of this process, starting to not just sketch out, but starting to prototype as well, right? So like, let's put something together that shows enough of what our proposed experience is, what our proposed direction is, so that we can share that with learners, but also share that with stakeholders as well. And I think there's something that's quite important for stakeholders to like see stuff happen, because often I think like learning design can be perceived as a bit of a dark art. Like stuff is happening, like having conversations, and like there's nothing really visible or tangible coming out until like you start seeing content on platforms and stuff like that. But it's good to like really early on, however we say quick and dirty, by which we mean like light, streamlined, sort of like basic that prototype is, like see something, like this is how we think this is going to work in a clickable wireframe, in something that you can click through on your phone, or like some paper prototypes, but you can see how that vision would be manifest later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this whole concept development stage, I mean, this is like the most fun bit, isn't it? Because this is where we're sketching out ideas, looking for inspiration from all sorts of places, and trying stuff out in a kind of a low risk, quick, low cost way, putting that in front of people and seeing what they think of it, rather than just describing something, for example. And we're all the same. We need to see stuff in order to respond to it. You can't read a specification document for a course or a product and give a meaningful response as to, is that what you want? It's like, I don't know. Show me something. And I think this is the real value of this stage. And there's different ways that we work through this concept development stage. It can be a whole series of activities that we do for ourselves and with whoever's developing the course. One really interesting way of working through this that we've done a few times is a design sprint. This is something that was developed initially by Google, I think, for their own sort of internal projects, really. And the idea is that over the course of 5 days, you develop and test a concept. So it's a kind of an accelerated design thinking process, an accelerated way of getting through this concept development stage. It's really good fun and really intense and really exhausting.
Sounds great.
But it can work really well. And I'd love to do a whole episode on it at some point in the future, actually. I think it'd be a really interesting one to explore more deeply, like how do you do a design sprint and for learning specifically, and how do you make that work really well? The key stages involved in that, and in our concept development work in general, are you need to start with a clarity stage where you are, in a way, there's a bit of overlap here with the discovery stage that we talked about earlier, but this is going much deeper. So you're exploring, what are the goals of this project? What does success look like? What are some of the risks? What are all the questions that we need to answer that we don't currently have answers to? What are the constraints that you have? So, do you have a budget that you have to work within? Do you have to launch this thing by a certain date? Do you have a team of 2 people who have to be able to do all of the work? These things are all really important. So in a design sprint, you'd spend probably the first day of that week working through all of these questions, so that by the end of it, everyone has a shared understanding of, right, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is why it's important to us. This is what a successful outcome would look like for everyone, for the learner and for us as an organisation. These are the things that could go wrong, and this is what we might do if that happens. And here's what we've got in terms of resources, and here are the constraints that we have in order to do this thing. And maybe here's a big old pile of questions that we have that we don't know the answers to, and that we're going to need to find the answers to. So that's day one. you're sort of looking to achieve clarity and agreement on what we're trying to achieve, who we're trying to achieve it for, and what success looks like. Then day 2 is focused on ideas. So this is the most creative stage in some ways. It's like, what out there could inspire us? Are there other solutions, products, maybe from completely unrelated areas? Something my supermarket does that is really interesting, that might be relevant to this. And sort of pulling all of those things together, working through what in the design sprint methodology are called expert interviews, where you bring in other people, either from within the organization or external, who might have an interesting perspective on this. And you just do these sort of short, really focused interviews to pull out interesting stuff. And then from there, you brainstorm ideas. And this is where you're sketching stuff, and there are a number of activities that you can do to make that work. So there's something called Crazy Eights that we use quite a lot, which is quite good as a way of kind of pulling ideas out of people's heads and getting them onto paper. Yeah,
we talk about that in the design thinking episode, but the Crazy Eights is where you take a piece of paper, fold it in half again, unfold it, and you've got a grid of 8 sort of squares, and in that you spend 8 minutes, a minute per square, to sketching down your first thoughts. And the idea there is it kind of moves you beyond your first thought, your first idea, and starts getting you exploring alternative ways that the product could go. Can get quite creative, can get quite wacky, but it's more of like a divergent thinking exercise. Let's just get as many ideas as we can out on paper so that we can start interrogating those and getting some feedback on those.
Yeah, and then in day 3 of a design sprint, you move into a more sort of convergent thinking mode where, okay, we generated a ton of ideas. What are we actually going to take forward? So it's kind of sifting what you've got, prioritizing, voting on which ideas seem most interesting or most relevant, and then sketching out a storyboard of the thing that you're going to prototype, which might be a product or a course or a feature or part of a product. And you end that day with a storyboard. Ideally, if you're doing this in person, back in the old days, pre-COVID, you would do that on big bits of paper and put them on the wall and scribble on them and all that kind of stuff. And it's a very fun, interactive process. But yeah, we're doing that remotely these days, using a tool called Mural, which I think we mentioned in a previous episode, which works really well. Yeah. So that's the day 3. Day 2, we came up with a load of ideas. Day 3, we're deciding on what we're going to take forward. Day 4, that's when you create a prototype, which might be a more high-res sketch or mock-up. It might be something that you could create in PowerPoint or Google Slides, for example, if you want something that people can click through. Or you could actually create a clickable wireframe in software. I mean, some people even actually create, working prototypes. All of those are perfectly valid. The main thing is, can you, in that one day, create something that you can then put in front of learners and test and validate your idea?
Yeah.
And that's what you do in day 5. So the final day of the design sprint, actually sit down with some learners, put this thing in front of them, put the prototype in front of them, and get them to engage with that and see what works and what doesn't, and then get their responses to that. And then collectively have a bit of a group huddle at the end and think, okay, what did we learn from that? Did we learn that this is a brilliant idea, we've created an amazing concept and we're ready to go? Or this is pretty good, but here's a few provisos and we need to change these aspects of it? Or it was a disaster, let's go back to the drawing board, which is not a nice thing to have to do. But again, it's a hell of a lot easier to do that at this stage than once you've spent a ton of time and money developing a full course or product. Those are the stages that we would work through, whether you do that as a design sprint process or you just do that as a series of steps that you work through. That's basically what we do in the concept development. So understand more deeply who the learners are, what the organization's goals are, what success looks like, generate a load of ideas, look for inspiration from outside, carry out expert interviews, sketch a load of stuff, home in on the ideas that are most interesting, most relevant, everyone agrees are most likely to succeed, create a quick prototype, and then test that, and then learn. And once you're happy you've got something that's working, then you're ready to move on.
Ready to move on to the content and platform blueprint. So go from that sort of artist sketch, as it were, to the engineering blueprints that enable you to build this thing. So the content and platform blueprint stage, this is where we start pulling together everything we need, all the documentation, the briefs, the specs, in preparation for going into full production. And that includes like taking the outcomes from that prototyping phase and working up things like what the learning design approach and principles are. This is how this thing does what it does. From a learning science perspective, we start mapping out more comprehensive, detailed course structure. So this is how all the modules are arranged, for example. This is the sequence of events that a learner goes through. We start pulling together learning experience maps or LX maps, and these are 1 page or 1 or 2 page slides typically that we use that just gives a visual representation of the different experiences that a learner goes through as they go through this course. So for example, if it's a blended learning course, like where do the in-person or face-to-face modes happen? And where does the online work happen? What's the relationship between those two modalities? What happens in each step? Like, are they being engaged to do something? Are they being expected to produce something? A step-by-step, blocked out representation of this is what the learner experiences through the course of this particular solution. I think taking that and going a bit deeper and thinking about what the different activities, for example, that we would expect them to interact with at each stage across the LX map and start building a bank of those. So we know that, for example, when you're in this particular like productive stage of the course, these are the types of activity templates that we think really bring that to life and really help facilitate what we need you to do at that point. And then going even deeper and creating content creation guidelines and style guides so that when whoever the writers may be or content creators may be, they have a set of guidelines, do's, don'ts, editorial style, all of this stuff that helps them actually put content together. So it's the real nuts and bolts of it. So this is like the plan. This is like the IKEA flat pack construction plan for putting this thing together.
And I think just coming back to what we mentioned about Agile earlier, I think really important within this is within that plan, which bits are fixed and which bits are expected to evolve and be flexible, and what are the priorities. So some things are going to be pretty fixed, like you mentioned a style guide, for example, to guide writers. An organisation might have its own style guide, or we would create one for them. That's not really going to evolve. The key learning objectives and learner goals that we've identified in the discovery and concept development stage, those are unlikely to change. That's setting our roadmap. The learning science informed learning design principles, they're not going to change as the course evolves. But how those things are expressed in terms of course materials or platform, those may change as we move through the production stage, as we work through that in sprints, if that's what we're doing. And it's really important that this blueprint makes it really clear what's fixed and what we expect to evolve in response to what we learn during production. So I think that's another key element.
No, definitely. And also talking to the platform side of this blueprinting as well. Like what we've talked about there is kind of very much sort of content blueprinting, like what the content needs to do, where it needs to do it, how it does it. In terms of the platform side, at this stage, we want to be capturing things like what are the user stories, for example. So as a learner, I need to do X. As a teacher or trainer, I need to do X. As an admin who is monitoring and taking care of this platform, I need to do X. Making sure we're capturing all these user stories to go into either developing a platform from scratch or capturing those so that we can start working on and enhancing an existing platform and pulling together in process sort of specifications for either existing or future platform that makes sure that we are building the right environment to deliver this experience.
Yeah. So at this point, we know what we're going to be developing in terms of content, we know what the platform needs to do, and we know which elements are set in stone and which ones we're expecting to evolve as we progress through the project and learn. And we then move into the last stage, which is the biggest stage, which is course production. This is where we're writing the content or adapting content if there's existing stuff. We are producing the media, for example, video production, audio production, artwork, photo research, all of that kind of stuff. And this is where we are creating a much more detailed platform specification sometimes, and more detailed user stories ready to hand over to a developer to start developing, where we're developing the platform UX and visual design. And then all of that stuff gets created, and that's a whole other episode, really, in terms of I guess our thoughts and
kettle of fish.
Yeah, we have lots of thoughts, particularly around content creation, about how to do that. It's something we've done a lot of, creating digital learning content. It would be really interesting, I think, to spend some time talking about that in a future episode. In terms of our process, this production stage, that's where it all happens. So that's where we have a team of writers and editors creating content, working in sprints. At the end of each sprint, sharing that with stakeholders and with learners, and learning from that, evolving the specs, updating the blueprint, and going from there.
I suppose, just to pick up on something you said, if I may kind of challenge it a little bit, you said like the content production or course production being sort of the biggest part of it. I think that's true in as much as this is where like stuff is created. This is where the volume of content and media and everything like comes together. But I kind of see this as like one of those typical like, iceberg drawings, right? So this is like the tip of the iceberg. This is the thing that's visible.
Yeah.
Whereas like beneath the surface is 5 times the mass of that effort that goes into what we've just described above, discovery and concept development. Like all of that is a considerable amount of thinking, work and effort that goes into the fifth that is visible, if that makes sense. And that's not to undermine, like it is an extensive piece of work often, but like it's all, there's a lot underneath the surface that needs to go into that.
I totally agree. And I think as a learning designer, the biggest frustration is when we are pushed to start at this stage. I'm still shocked and surprised at how frequently that happens, that it's like, right, let's start writing some content without having gone through all of that previous stuff. And hopefully, from the way that we've talked through all of the stages leading up to this, it's pretty obvious why they're important. And I guess what you miss out by not doing those, and what risks that entails if you just jump straight into production. But it still happens a lot. And that's something we're always feeling we're having to make the case for taking the time to work through those previous 3 stages. But in our experience, it just makes such an enormous difference to how well things go and how likely you are to have a successful outcome.
Exactly.
At that production stage.
So, hey, Laurie, I've got some bricks, bought some land, build us a house, will you?
Let's go. Yeah.
So, well, hang on. Whoa. Got a few questions first.
Yeah.
I'll go straight into that.
Nice to loop back to that analogy, Tim. Yeah, I've got some land, I've got a pile of bricks, let's start building a wall. That's actually what we see happening really frequently in our field, in the learning design field. And it's kind of, if someone suggested that for a house build, you think they were completely crazy, and they would be. But this happens all the time in learning, in the creation of learning experiences and courses. I don't know. For some reason, it seems reasonable to just start building a wall without having assessed even, is this solid land that we're building on, let alone what are we actually trying to build? Who for? What do they need? Do we all agree we're trying to build the same thing? Does this look like what you want to build? Yes, no, yes, great. Okay, here's the plan. Now let's start building. Yeah, that's the difference. So yeah, I guess a slight howl of frustration as a learning designer that the number of times we get asked, right, can you start building a wall on Monday? Happens all the time, and I'm sure other learning designers or people doing similar work have experienced that as well. Adventures in Learning Design was brought to you by LearnJam.
To learn more about what we do and who we do it for, and to download your own free copy of our learning design principles, head over to learnjam.com.